You are now listening to the Bluprint Pod. Get ready for another exciting episode, so sit back, relax, and enjoy.
Welcome to another episode of the Bluprint Pod. I am your host, Ray Roots, and today I am joined by my friend, my co-host, and my business partner, Muhammad Imam, aka MI Visuals. How are you, bro?
I'm all good, all good. We're in tier 4 of lockdown here in London now.
Oh wow, yeah. I heard you guys gotta take care of yourselves.
Yeah, I'm not sure what. I think everyone's kind of unsure about things, and our glorious leaders haven't helped out. But yeah, it is what it is. But I'm all good, thankfully. Yeah, looking forward to the episode. We've got a great guest on today. So yeah.
Yes, and today's guest is Jody Wozencroft Ray. Welcome on the show, Jody.
Thank you very much. And you got my name right. I'm impressed.
Yes.
I can't lie.
I practiced.
I can't lie. I think I would have failed. Despite growing up in a country where all the teachers were getting our names wrong all the time.
Yeah, and I practiced for that reason. I practiced before the show started. So there's that. So Jody, if you want to introduce yourself to the audience, tell us a little bit about what you do.
Okay, so my name is Jody. I'm based in the UK. Thankfully, though, not in Tier 4 because I'm up in Cheshire in the northwest. And I am a psychotherapist. So without going into tons of detail, I mainly do CBT, which is cognitive behaviour therapy. I'm an accredited practitioner for that. I'm a registered social worker. I'm an associate fellow for the Islamic Association of Islamic Psychology. And I kind of use an integrative approach, which means basically I take all the good bits from lots of different therapies and use it all together. So it's kind of a mixing pot of lots of different therapeutic approaches. And I work in private practice. And on the side of that, makes me sound like a really busy bee. On the side of that, I also have a podcast that I do with a group of girls. So my private business is House of Healing CBT, and the podcast is Converts in Conversation. The reason it's called that is because we're all converts to Islam. So we are all people that have embraced Islam as adults, and we kind of just talk about our experiences and what that journey's kind of been like, really.
Very interesting. I think maybe you're the perfect person for this topic that we're going to talk about today then. And it's about self-doubt. But before we get into like questions and stuff, I kind of want to tell a little story about myself so everyone gets to know me a little bit better. All right. So let's take it back to like 2001. And I'm 7 years old at this point. And my brother takes me to the movies to watch Harry Potter. And I watched the first Harry Potter movie. I turned into a complete fanatic, and I buy the wands, and I hope I smash my head into a door so I can get the scar.
Okay.
Like I'm praying for that to happen.
But I was going to make a joke about it, and then you just went there yourself.
I remember I was in Turkey, and my head accidentally smashed into a door, and I wasn't upset. I was like happy, like yes, I'm getting a scar.
Wow,
and it never happened. But during this time of Harry Potter fandom, I wanted to get into film. I really wanted to get into film because I think the Harry Potter series really inspired me. And at first it was like acting, but then as the years went on, I started getting into being the guy behind the camera and to get into directing. And I've considered myself a director and not a filmmaker, but a director for the past year and a half, I would say. And then I went back to watch like a film breakdown of the Harry Potter series. And I'm listening to this guy talk about why the series was successful. And he's talking about the success of the first director and all the choices he had to make and all the creative decisions he had to make and the team he had to employ. And I'm sitting there listening to this and I'm admiring this director and all the work that he's done, the foundation he's laid for something that turned out to be a huge franchise. And as I'm watching it, I'm starting to doubt my own skills of directing. I'm looking at it like, wow, this guy built an entire franchise. Like Warner Brothers Studios built an entire franchise off of the decisions that this guy made. So if he had failed, the Harry Potter franchise would not have turned out to what it was. So as I'm watching this, I'm admiring this guy and I'm starting to love this series even more. But I'm at the same time doubting my own skills. And as I was watching that, I quickly noticed, like, oh my God, this is weird. Why is this happening? And I immediately messaged my co-host and I said, yo, we should do an episode on self-doubt, because there has to be some interesting things that we can explore on this topic. And that's when I took to Twitter to search for someone who's like a specialist. And Jody, that's when your name came up.
Mm-hmm.
So now that you guys know a little bit about me and what I really like, which is Harry Potter, I wanted to ask the question, what is self-doubt in its purest form? What is it? Can you answer that question, Jody?
I think it's quite a complex question. I think as a term, it sounds like it's, there's just one type of it. That's what it is. End of. But actually, in terms of psychologically how we think and how we conceptualize a lot of different things, it comes from a lot of different places. So self-doubt in its truest form is purely having a doubt about either ourselves as people or our abilities, our behaviors, something about our experiences. And a doubt is literally just not being 100% sure. And I suppose the caveat with that is, as human beings, we can't be 100% sure about anything. It would be unnatural to. When we walk out of our front door, we are not 100% sure that we're not going to be knocked down by a bus. When we go to the shop, we're not going to be 100% sure that the things that we want in that shop are going to be there. But we cope with a lot of that uncertainty. But when we're uncertain about ourselves, it rocks us a little bit more, because we're with ourselves 24/7. So it can be a real difficult thing for people if it becomes something that's chronic or something that affects people in a sort of day-to-day sense.
So would you say that it's normal to have self-doubt?
I think honestly, it would be abnormal not to have self-doubt. We have to doubt ourselves sometimes, otherwise we'd never reflect, we'd never change, because we'd be so 100% sure about everything we did, thought, said, believed. We just wouldn't grow.
That's interesting. Mohammed Imam, did you have anything you wanted to follow up on here?
I mean, I think she covered everything, to be honest. Like, I would think the same, because I feel like you said before the call, we kind of talked about it a little bit, and maybe it's just a survival mechanism as well. Because if you don't have it, like you said, I think you just wouldn't push yourself enough. I feel like it's a similar thing to guilt for me, because there's like this idea in my head, like if I don't do something, or I put something out, for example, like I'm gonna do this, and then I'm accountable to everyone who's seen whatever I put out, and then I feel kind of guilty if I don't do it. So it kind of spurs me on to go ahead and do that thing. So I feel like self-doubt it has a similar benefit in that regard. And I do think it would be a bit weird if you are constantly like just confident in everything you do. Like maybe you'll become really complacent and like stop striving to push yourself. So I think it would be weird, especially when you're like around other people, when you're seeing what everyone else is doing. Naturally, it's like you're seeing competition and you want to be at that level or better. And without that, then you might not push yourself at all. So yeah.
So what's the difference? Because I asked on Twitter, like, hey, who suffers from self-doubt? And obviously, like you said, it's a complex term, and it's not an easy or simple to define it. But 90% said yes, I deal with self-doubt, and then 10% said no, I don't deal with self-doubt. What's that about?
I think that is usually about whether people are preoccupied with it. So again, I don't think there's anybody on the planet that doesn't ever have self-doubt, ever. But different people will have different beliefs about that experience. So if I had self-doubt and thought, oh my gosh, that must mean that something's wrong, or that must mean there's something wrong with me, I'm going to pay so much more attention to that than someone that thinks that's just a passing thought. Everybody gets that. So it's going to be a really different experience, even though the situation, the actual experience of having a doubt about oneself is the same. The experience is going to be completely different because of our beliefs around it and the way that we experience that situation in different ways.
So what makes someone So if you have two people, what makes one of them shrug it off and say, "Oh, it's just because I haven't learned it yet," and the other one that goes into a complete panic? What is, obviously it's a broad question as well, but what do you think are some contributing factors to their different experiences with this self-doubt?
I think it is absolutely a broad question, but to kind of have a think about it. So in terms of our brains, without getting loads of deep sciencey stuff, but basically our brains have a negative bias, and that is because they are there to protect us. So if we were, cave people that were wandering around and a tiger came along and it looked hungry and we didn't have any negative bias, we wouldn't ever look out for danger. So we have grown as people, as a society, to look out for danger wherever that might be. So when we come out of those caves, we kind of look around, are there any predators? If there are predators, we protect ourselves, or we run away, or we hide. We do something to keep ourselves safe. In the modern world, that's no different. It's just that the perceived threats are different. And for some people, that little self-doubt will be hungry tiger there waiting at the mouth of the cave, and they go, oh my gosh, I've got to do something about this threat. I'm really going to pay attention to it. For other people, they will be so accepting of the fact that there are threats in the world, including hungry tigers, that they take it in their stride. They just carry on as normal. They don't let the perceived threat sort of control their lives, if that makes sense. So it's all about, I always talk about in therapy sessions having like a little smoke alarm in our brains, and the posh word for that is the amygdala, and it's kind of an alarm system. And depending on how we were, and this starts all the way in, when our mothers were pregnant with us. So depending on how you were in utero and how you grew up as a small child and an older child and adolescent, then life experiences as an adult, all of those things condition our amygdala to pay attention to certain threats. So for some people, they will monitor the internal experiences, whether it's the heart beating fast, whether it's a self-doubt thought, or they will monitor situations around them, or they will be so okay with the idea that there will be sort of an underlying threat just day to day that it doesn't impact them to the degree that it does for that other person.
That's interesting. So is oh, sorry, sounded like you had a question.
No, I was gonna ask, like, do you think, like, in terms of like, I don't know if you're a parent or not, but in terms of like raising kids and stuff, how would you suggest? Obviously, this is a whole like different thing in itself. You could probably write a book about it, but how would you suggest like raising your children then in that regard? Because obviously, you're saying there's all these different factors, environmental and biological as well.
Mm-hmm.
But how would you suggest, like, or what would you say is the best way of approaching, for example, raising children? I don't know. It's really off topic, but
it's a great question. It's a big question. I suppose it's understanding that self-doubt, if we almost think of it as like, like on Lord of the Rings, there's Gollum, the thing that like goes after the ring and it coughs, and it's really not very nice. So our self-doubt, our self-critic can become a bit like Gollum, and it can become very powerful and very noisy and very loud as an adult. And the thing is that that's like our inner self. So it can become this ugly sort of toxic thing, but that inner self is nurtured from birth. So if you have a baby, for example, and it cries and you go, okay, nappy change, gonna feed it, rock it to sleep, give it a cuddle and a kiss, and it calms down, its brain, that amygdala goes, my need has been met, I'm okay, and the stress hormones reduce. Whereas in some parts of the world, including the UK, that there has been sort of pushes to do the cry it out method. So I am a parent and I used to work with children as a therapist, so I know a lot about child development, so I won't go into tons of detail, but just to give a kind of overview. So the cry it out method is the idea that a baby cries and it's tired, you leave it until it cries itself to sleep, because essentially it will learn that it's okay and it's safe. The error with that is that it doesn't learn that. Its brain just learns that no one comes. And that's really sad to think about as a parent. And essentially that amygdala never learns how to settle itself. It never learns that the world is a safe place. So that little Gollum creature becomes very frightened. Or it becomes wanting to fight everything. So it can become very, very aggressive. So you can kind of have these two sides of the same coin. Someone that's very, very frightened or very, very aggressive, but in the center of it is fear of not being safe. So if we don't nurture that as an adult, that self-doubt is massive. And that's essentially what a lot of people come to me for therapy for, because they've never had that nurtured. So back to your question about how we nurture that, it's essentially meeting children's needs. If they fall over and they graze their knee and you think, gosh, it's only a little graze, it's not really that bad. You make a fuss and you go, oh, there, have a cuddle, you'll be okay, off you pop. You know, you meet their need where they need it. Emotional needs too. I'm just thinking about my little boy, he's 4. He hurt his finger today. I'm doing like air quotes. So he hurt his finger. He bumped it on something. There was no injury, but I went, there, you'll be okay. Have a cuddle. And he went, okay. And off he popped. It's that idea of them voicing, however they're going to communicate that, whether it's cry from a baby, whether it's a small child going, I've hurt myself, or I need a cuddle. It's letting them communicate something. And then you're going, okay, there's a need. I'm going to meet it. And then their brains learn that actually the world becomes a safe place. So self-doubt, therefore, isn't as much of a threat when you get older, because the world is safe and you are safe.
Yeah,
That's interesting. So as a child, you can become a victim of neglect, or in some capacity, or you could say the wrong, in air quotes, the wrong method of parenting, if you want to call it that. But what do you do as an adult to combat past experiences?
It's a tricky one, because essentially our inner selves, they're not set in stone, absolutely not. But if we have a belief that they are, that can really, really be a detriment to us healing from whatever we've gone through. And it can stop us moving forward with what we want to do, because that self-doubt becomes massive. You know, if you've been told as a child that, you know, you're not clever, or you're not stupid, or people will judge you if you do A, B, and C, then you're going to think that either you're a threat to your own safety, or that other people are a threat to your safety. And I use safety in a loose term. So it could be a social threat, an emotional threat, a physical threat, you know, lots of different threats. And I think it's really important to be able to sit as an adult and be able to go back to those experiences and process them, and be able to sit with the emotions that brings, because again, emotions can become a sort of sense of threat, and a lot of the people I work with just don't want to feel. They just want to just not think about it, just not feel, just get rid of it. And it doesn't work like that. The brain is constantly assessing for threat. So if you feel a little bit anxious, a little bit doubtful, it's going to go, that smoke alarm, bing, 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 there's a threat about. So it's about being able to sit with the emotion, to process it with a trained professional, and come to terms with whatever's happened, and then decide, okay, where am I going to draw this line, and how am I going to move forward with my life and the values that I want to live by? And acknowledging that your brain will kick off, because it does. It's learnt lots and lots of patterns over the years. So it might be that one of your values is, I want to work in creative fields, but your self-doubt is going, yeah, but you're not as good as that other guy. You can't do this. Like, who do you think you are? And that voice can feel really, really loud. So for a lot of my clients, it is about teaching them to go, okay, it's a bit like, you know, when you walk down the high street and there's a salesman, and they're kind of like, come over here, come buy this thing, come donate to this charity. And you're thinking, oh my gosh, I don't want to talk to anyone. I just want to get to the end of the street. It's like that. Self-doubt is like that. If we stop every time a salesman comes up to us, we would never get to the end of the street. But if we acknowledge, yeah, there's a salesman, I'm going to keep walking forward anyway towards my values and live a value-based life, that's how we get fulfillment, that's how we heal, and that's how we, you know, live the life that we want to live.
I'm just going to ignore all the salesmen now.
That was a pretty good analogy. It makes it a lot easier to understand, because it can sometimes be broad, even the concepts of self-doubt and how to address it, like to sit down and deal with your emotions. I don't know what that means in practical terms, but I think the analogy helped a little bit, and so that was pretty good. But I have a follow-up question. So is that, how does self-doubt differentiate itself from like self-worth or confidence?
So I had to think about this before we started, because I was thinking, well, to me, confidence is something that you can see in a person, or that you can feel in yourself. You know, your chest might be puffed out a little bit, and you know, you're walking a certain way and you're feeling confident. And I suppose confidence is a positive belief or a faith in yourself and your abilities to do something, whether it's meeting your own needs, whether it's doing a project, whether it's being able to cope with a so-called negative emotion like feeling anxious. So it's that confidence of managing those situations and thinking, actually, I've got the resources to do that. You know, I've got the resilience to do that. Whereas self-worth is more about that inner self, so that we have core beliefs. So if we've grown up, say, for example, not doing very well at school, we might have a core belief that I'm stupid. And that will be triggered off in lots of different ways. And self-worth is made up of all these different labels that we have as core beliefs. So it might be, I'm stupid, but I'm lovable. I'm creative, but I'm inconsistent. So we have all these core beliefs, and we all have positive and negative core beliefs, every single one of us. I have yet to meet someone that is purely negative or purely positive, which is, you know, it's a good thing. So I suppose it's that thing of self-worth is the sort of upbringing and the experiences and the sort of longer term stuff. Confidence is in the here and now, and your belief and your faith in yourself and your abilities to cope with the situation at hand, if that makes sense. And I suppose confidence, if we have it longer term and we nurture it, can start to change some of those self-worth core beliefs type stuff.
Oh, that's interesting. I want to explore that. So what do you mean by that?
So if we think about, I'm trying to think of a good example or a metaphor, because I do like a good metaphor. I'm obsessed with metaphors. I could speak a whole session in metaphors if I'm honest. I suppose in terms of confidence, it might be something about, in fact, I'll use my own example. So I went into private practice a year ago, literally just before COVID hit. And then COVID hit, and I was like, oh gosh, this is going to be an interesting, you know, run of things. So my confidence was, you know what, I think I can cope with this. I think I'm going to be okay. But a lot of my core beliefs are about my intelligence. Now that sounds a bit silly. You know, I've been to uni for six years. I'm going back to uni in January. You know, I'm not a stupid person, but my core beliefs tell me that I am, if that makes sense. So we might have loads of evidence against our core beliefs, but because they're core beliefs, they're very hard to evidence against. So I'm thinking, well, you know what, I can do this. I'm feeling a bit confident. I'll be all right. But my core beliefs are going, no, you can't cope with this. There's no chance we're going to get through this. There's a global pandemic. It's going to be terrible. Ugh. But now we're a year down the line, and actually things have gone okay. There's always bumps in the road when you're in private practice. That's okay. But the core belief, it's still there, and it always will be. It's almost like a scar. So core beliefs will always leave some sort of marking depending on the situation you're in. But for me, my confidence in my private practice has grown to a point where that core belief isn't triggered in terms of work. So I don't get to the point where I sit in a session going, oh my gosh, I'm stupid. I don't know what I'm on about. Because I've grown in confidence and I've lived it for long enough that core belief has kind of calmed down. It's less raw.
I always think about these kind of things, especially with like your profession. That's probably like the most important place not to have those kind of thoughts always popping up. I've always thought about that. How does that? Because like my wife works in a local government, and she's always dealing with like people that are being affected by the local government, actual people in real life. Every time I hear like different stories and stuff, like it makes me sad. I'm like she's a tough person for like being able to do it on a day-to-day basis, and I'm just wondering how that also relates to your profession, for example, and how you like protect yourself emotionally.
It's a tricky one, isn't it? I think I've learnt over the years. I mean, I've been in therapy for 7 years now, so I'm getting there in terms of experience and knowledge and things. And I think in the beginning, I lacked confidence. So if I didn't know something, it would create a lot of anxiety for me. I would feel really wobbly, not really know how to deal with it. Now, however, if someone brings me something and I really don't know, I'm confident enough in my expertise and my knowledge and my experience to say, I don't know. and just sit with someone going, we're not sure at the moment, but that's okay. And actually being able to sit with the uncomfortableness of, I haven't got a clue right now about what this person said to me. And I think any genuine therapist or any genuine person that works face-to-face with people, if you have a deep and inner confidence, you're okay with saying, I don't know. If that kind of makes sense. In terms of caring for yourself emotionally in the work that I do, because you're obviously hearing about some heavy stuff, any decent therapist, so this is a message to all listeners if they're looking for therapy, any decent therapist will always have supervision. If they do not have supervision, it is a red flag. Do not go near them with a barge pole. So I have supervision with 2 therapists on a regular basis, at least monthly, to talk about cases that I'm not sure on, cases that are difficult, cases that might be upsetting to me, depending on, what we're talking about. But having that space to air it. A lot of therapists also have their own therapy or counselling to have another space to sit with those emotions.
I was going to ask about that. Who does the therapy for therapists?
But usually other therapists, which can be tricky because if you're in a sort of network of therapists, you're then having to try and find someone that doesn't know anybody else, because otherwise it feels a bit too close to home, and that can be a bit tricky. You don't want to be at a networking event and then bump into your own therapist who you've been crying at for 8 hours on end in terms of therapy, because it would just be a little bit awkward, wouldn't it? So it's a tricky one, and I think a lot of therapists come in and out of therapy depending on where they are personally. But also being able to have boundaries and go, actually, I finished my work day. So I work at home now because of COVID. So when I finish my work day, everything goes away. I don't see my laptop, I don't see my books, I don't see my notes. All of it's gone. And that's that boundary, because I don't have an office to leave as a natural boundary. So I have to create my own boundary and be very committed to it for my own well-being, really.
That's interesting, because I've got a ton of questions, by the way. So I don't know how long this podcast. We're going to try and keep it to an hour, but Ray's got a whole agenda. So whenever
go ahead. Honestly, you can ask whatever. I'm listening.
Because I think a really important question I have is. First, I was going to make a joke about, do the other therapists have their own kind of therapy, methods and stuff, and are they snobby about it? But you can answer that in your own time. But my therapy is better than yours. But also, I love hearing stories about how people got into what they do. And I think it would be very nice to hear that about you. In terms of even the way you do your things now. Do you do things a lot of the way based on textbook methods, or do you do things based on your own feelings and ideas about things and your theories? Just a bit of background about how you got into it and that kind of thing.
That's a good question. I'm going to bob back to you. Does everyone like their own sort of modality and approaches? Absolutely. So when I hear people talking about, for example, person-centered counselling, I've had person-centered counselling and it is not my cup of tea. Whereas CBT is very, very different, and I will defend CBT until the cows come home, because I know the evidence bases and I know the research and all the rest of it. And I think people do get quite protective with their own approach because they've spent years training for it. So you live and breathe it. It's almost like a little CBT cult. So it does become, the be all and end all of therapy. I suppose in terms of how I became a therapist. So I always wanted to work with children. So initially I did a degree in childhood studies, and then I worked as a teaching assistant, but with children with additional needs. So these were additional learning needs, but also additional physical needs. So one of the children I worked with was a wheelchair user. We had to catheterize him every day because he wasn't able to use the toilet and things like that. So it was very much a mix of care and teaching in one role. So it was a learning curve. I was only 21 when I got the job, and it was a bit of a shock to the system. But no, it was good. I was glad for the experience. And from that, I didn't know whether I wanted to go into teaching or social work. And the job that I was in would lend itself to either in terms of applying for the next qualification. And essentially, I get a bit bored, so I wanted variety. And the idea of teaching a curriculum each year, I thought, I don't think I can do that. I think I'd go a bit spare. So I went for social work. And I went into social work wanting to work into child protection. Yeah. And for those that don't know, child protection is all about safeguarding children. So if it's abuse, neglect, tricky situations at home, substance misuse, court systems, all that sort of stuff. So it's quite gritty. And I spent, honestly, 5 days as a student in a department for child protection and thought, I do not want to do this. I could not do this as a job. No one saw children. It was all paperwork. And you just got shouted at a lot. It just didn't seem like much fun or fulfillment for me. But then I got a placement in a homeless hostel for young people. And initially, I got this placement and thought, oh my gosh, I don't want to do this. They're all going to be rough and it's going to be terrible. Bearing in mind, I was quite young. I was quite judgy when I was young. I've matured since then, thankfully.
Yeah.
So I worked there, loved it. Got to know all these kids that are basically being kicked out of home for various different reasons and were just trying to make it and survive. And we got 2 placements during my master's when I did social work. So my next one was with young offenders. So I kind of upgraded from the people that I thought would rough to people that I think might stab me. So that was, again, a learning curve. But again, I absolutely loved it. I loved sitting with like a young lad of 15 telling me to F off and he's not going to work with me, and being able to engage him and help him get on, a better path. And essentially being that supportive person that had boundaries. I was part of what we call the prosecution in terms of the court system. But I really enjoyed sort of towing that fine line of being nurturing but boundaried. And then from then, I got a job working in the child and adolescent mental health service as a therapist.
Right.
And the only qualification you needed at the time was to be a social worker or a nurse. So I was like, tick, I've got the social work stuff. I'm going to get a job there. It took me years to get in because the jobs are like gold dust. I managed to get in, and again, it was a shock. I was in what we call a tier 3 service. So you're working with kids that are one step away of having to be hospitalised. So they're really, really unwell when we actually meet them in that service. And the thresholds are very high. So everyone's super poorly when they come in. So again, learning curve. There seems to be a pattern in my jobs. And then that was with the NHS National Health Service, and they offered to train me up in CBT. So I was like, yeah, let's go for that. So I did a year of a high intensity course. So it's 5 days a week. You have to submit 3 videos a week to be looked at by your peers and a supervisor. You have to do case reports. You have to do all lectures and all the rest of it. So it's quite a hard going year, but again, you get immersed in everything that is CBT. You live and breathe CBT. You dream it as well. Some nightmares too. But, you get through it and you survive. And then, so after my CBT course, I returned back to my NHS job. And I found that for me, in terms of creativity, and this comes to your question about approaches, in terms of creativity in the NHS, you can only use the textbook example. There is no flexibility whatsoever because the evidence base says that this works, therefore that's what you're going to do. The problem with that is the evidence base is always done in a very small sample of people that have no other issues going on. They don't have any safeguarding stuff. They don't have any neurodevelopmental conditions. And we had a lot of kids with autism and ADHD. So none of these protocols worked with them. So I started to get a little bit disillusioned. Like, is therapy really for me? Do I want to keep doing this if I don't think it works? Because you can't work full time every day doing something that you don't think is benefiting people. So then I started to think, do I go into private practice? And my brain was going, you can't do that. No, that is not an option. And then I took the plunge. And then COVID happened.
Can I just ask why that was the case in terms of why you thought that it wasn't a good option? Is it because of, like, you didn't want to make it like a gatekeeping thing where if you have the money, then you can do it, but if you don't, then go through the NHS process?
There was part of that really it sat very difficultly for me because I'd never charged for therapy. People just went to the GP and sat on a waiting list for 2 years and then might have got some therapy. A lot of the time they got one session and goodbye, you don't meet your threshold, which is slightly heartbreaking, I've got to say. I think for me, it was that idea of once I came to terms with the idea that if people want to pay, they can pay. And that's, great if they want to do that. Once I came to terms with that, it was a case of, and actually one of my managers came to me and said it. So I specialise in therapy for Muslims. So I come from like an Islamic perspective in a lot of my therapy. And my manager said to me, she's not the most worldly of people, shall we say. and sort of said, is there really a market for that? Do Muslims really want therapy? And it was that moment where I thought, they really do, and I need to take this plunge, even if it feels uncomfortable, even if my wage is not going to be guaranteed, even if I've not got a lovely NHS pension, which, by the way, is not lovely anymore because it changed. So it was that idea of I'm going to have to sit with either staying in this job, being stressed out, not sleeping, sometimes crying after work because of all the things that I'd had to hear and not being able to sort out for people, or I can take the plunge and risk whether things could be better. So I decided to take a plunge and risk it, and thankfully it's been okay so far.
That's good to hear. Yeah, I mean, my last question would be like in this kind of topic is, what would you suggest to someone that's kind of thinking about going into like studying therapy? Or because obviously a lot of things have changed from like when you started and where you are at now. Obviously, it also depends on what they want to do and how like what their needs and situations are. But like, what would you suggest to someone that's like who wants to get into it? For example, obviously you are like you said you consider yourself a holistic therapist, so you're dealing with a variety of different methods and combining them together, which makes a lot of sense because there's no such thing as a black and white like emotional state. So what would you suggest to someone that wants to kind of get into it?
I'd say that there's two main routes. So once people start looking into it, they will find there's this very much a disparity between therapy and counselling. Essentially, they are interchangeable terms. That there's no real difference. They're just different types of therapy. So if you're wanting to go into CBT, for example, usually you will already need an undergraduate degree because it's a postgraduate level sort of profession.
Yeah.
If you're wanting to go into person-centered counselling, you can do that from college upwards. So it starts with like a level 2, which is, I think it's like 6 weeks, and then goes on to a level 3, which is a year, a level 4, which is 2 years. So you can build your way up even if you've not gone to uni before. But there is a difference in terms of evidence base. So person-centered counselling hasn't got a huge, robust evidence base that it works. That's not to say it doesn't for some people. I think it absolutely does. It's just the funding that's gone into research is focused on other things. And the other thing is looking at actually what you want to earn at the end of it, because counsellors do not earn as much as, when I say counsellors, I mean person-centered counsellors, do not earn as much as other therapies. But saying that, there are so many therapies. So there's things like human givens therapy, there's somatic experiencing, there's transactional analysis, there's solution-focused therapy. There's an endless list of therapies you can train in. But essentially, I'd say get your sort of core base. So whether it's CBT, whether it's counselling, but get a core base and then look into all the other fancy ones that you might want to look into. There's a lot of like Facebook groups and things that help people look into what they might want to go into. There's a particular one on CBT called CBT Careers, which basically advises people how to get into CBT training and helps them out with that. So that's a really good Facebook group to join if people are interested in CBT. But essentially, it's looking at what your options are, but not looking for too long because you will get overwhelmed with the amount of different options there are in terms of what therapy you want to offer. And I suppose it's what sort of problems you would like to work with as well. So with person-centered counselling, it pretty much works with anything, but the evidence base is better for some things than others. With CBT, it's very good with anxiety and depression, but also things like psychosis. With things like transactional analysis, that's more about relationship therapy. Somatic experiencing is all about trauma. So there's loads of different therapies and loads of different things it's used for. It depends on what you'd like to work with, essentially. I'd start from there and then look at what your options are in terms of the different types of therapy that work for that thing that you want to work with.
Thanks for that. And on another last question, Ray's nudging me to move on now. At what point would you say that someone should consider going through therapy and seeking therapy for their own traumas?
That's also a really good question. I think there's a big taboo on I'm not bad enough for therapy. The amount of consultations I do, which is I literally do like a 15-minute free phone call for people to see, do they want therapy or not? And so many of them say, well, I don't really think, I'm that bad. I want people to think of therapy as almost like physio. You've got an ache and a pain, you pop to the physio and you go, I've got this ache and pain, help me out, give me some exercises, give me some techniques or whatever else. Therapy should be like that. It should be little mental health check-in. So if you're feeling really anxious, but it's going to be a short-term thing, have some therapy to support your way through it. It doesn't have to be that, the world is ending and you feel horrendous. It could just be you're having a bit of a wobble and it's just a space to talk. The other thing to say is if you're at a point with any disorder, mental health disorder, where it's impacting your day-to-day functioning, or you've got any thoughts about hurting yourself or ending your life, absolutely go to your GP or primary physician, depending on where you are in the world, and talk to someone, because you don't have to suffer. Lots of people that I work with have had disorders for 10, 15, 20 years, and then we work together and with 6 sessions, they've got the life back. And it kind of pains me to know that a lot of people don't think, actually, I'm worthy of therapy, I'm worthy of that time, I'm worthy of spending that bit of money on myself or going to the GP and having a 10-minute appointment to talk it through, because they think they're, quote unquote, not bad enough, not poorly enough. There's no threshold of you having to be at death's door. Just come and speak to someone, because that's what therapists want. We'd much rather you come to us when you're having a little bit of a wobble than if you've been suffering for 15, 20 years.
I feel like there's like you said, there's really some kind of taboo there, but it's also like a Hollywood kind of thing. I feel like every time you see someone in a film that's going through therapy, it's like they've done something, or
lay on a
they've been
couch
through something,
talking about the childhood and all that. Yeah,
like they've been through something crazy. But I feel like that's a big factor as well, because that's what you think about when you think about therapy. And like we also like a lot of us, like once we hit like 17, 18, we start looking at like driving and stuff like that. We like happily pay out of our pockets to start learning how to drive and stuff. But we never think about like the traumas that we've experienced. And I wonder, like, how do you like publicize that a bit better? Like, obviously you're doing your work, you're doing your podcast and other things. But how does that? How do you work towards becoming more accepting of that and lowering that taboo? Like, what would you suggest to us as people who are listening now?
I think naming it. So if someone is looking down in the dumps and you say, how are you? And they go, I'm fine. It's okay to go, I don't think you're fine. Like, what's up? Or are you really okay? Or how are you really feeling? Just giving people a space to actually out, what they feel. Because that's the first step. You might be the first person that someone opens up to and goes, actually, I'm really struggling. And then you can start those conversations about, okay, what can I do to support you? Do you need me to, text you once a week and just say, how are you? Do you want to meet up for a cup of tea? COVID allowing, obviously. Do you want to have a Zoom call and just have a chat and a catch up and have some lunch? I do lots of lunch dates with my friends. So obviously we're all quite isolated in the UK. I imagine the rest of the world is very similar. So we'll have like little lunch dates where we'll sit and eat our lunch and, just have a chat, and just having that connection so that if someone is struggling, they're able to go, I'm not having a great time. It does not have to be a sort of inquisition of, are you depressed? Are you anxious? What's going on with you? It doesn't have to be, 10 million questions. It can just be, are you really okay? Is there anything I can do for you? Sometimes, and I do have a lot of calls where someone will call up and say, my friend wants therapy, but they're feeling a bit nervous about calling up. So that's how you can support people too. You can offer to shop around for therapists. You can offer to go to the GP with them, COVID allowing. So, you don't have to fix it. Don't feel pressured into becoming a therapist yourself, because a lot of friends do. They think, oh my gosh, friends opened up to me. I need to do something about this. That's not your role in this. Your role is to be a support to get them the help that they need.
Okay, so I think Ray wants to move on now. So
Yes,
that's very interesting.
I was thinking about something you said earlier about your core values and beliefs about yourself. And it got me thinking about, I was listening to a podcast episode. Mike Tyson has a podcast called Hot Boxing with Mike Tyson. and he's talking about people who he's sparring with who are absolutely killing him, like they're destroying him in training.
Mm-hmm.
But he said put them in a ring with an audience and they can't perform.
Mm.
And it made me think what you said earlier about one of your core beliefs is that you know that you're capable of going through university, you know that you're intelligent, but for some reason you were doubting whether or not you could go back to university. And in my case, it was the whole directing thing. Like, I know I'm capable of making stuff that's interesting, but once I'm looking at someone who's more accomplished, I'm starting to doubt myself. And then the example of that Mike Tyson used, why is it that some people are performing at a really high level when it doesn't matter? Like, for example, I know how to, when I make a video for myself, I'll make a great video.
Mm-hmm.
But as soon as I start thinking of myself in the context of, hey, if a studio paid for it, then I'm not sure if I can do it. Or for you, in your case, you know that you're intelligent, you know that you're well read, but as soon as we put you in the context of a university, you start doubting yourself. Or for Mike Tyson, it's about sparring and fighting. Like, what is it about that affects performance?
It's a great question. There's lots of different things. Essentially, and I'm going to use the example of coming on the podcast today. And I started speaking to my husband and I said, I've got this podcast later on. I'm feeling really nervous. And he said, why? What are you talking about? I said, self-doubt. And he went, right, well, you know about that. And I went, yeah, but what if they know more than me? Or what if I don't know what to say? Or, what if they've got like PhDs in psychology and I don't even know? Like, what if it's just going to be awful? And the thing is with the brain, again, it's like coming out of that cave and looking for that tiger. The brain is really good at looking to the future and predicting what might happen, but it does it with a really negative bias. And that keeps us, over generations safe. If we walk across the road, we've got a negative bias of, I need to look both ways because what if a car comes? We need that to survive. Without it, we would risk certain death most of the time. The problem is, if we get into a habit of paying attention to that negative bias, it can stop us doing the stuff that we want to do. So if it's, for example, if I was listening to that, little voice going, well, what if you don't know what you're talking about? I might have then, emailed Ray and go, you know what, something's come up, can't come on tonight, can't do it. And then that inner critic has won. And the more that inner critic wins, the more your brain thinks that inner critic kept me safe. So I need to listen to it more. So then every time it goes, you can't do that, you don't know about that, you'll go, okay, yeah, that's keeping me safe. So I'm going to obey and I'm going to step back from whatever it is that I need to do, or I don't want to put too much effort into it because I'll probably fail anyway. So it's that thing of we can reinforce our inner critic or we can weaken it and live the life that we want to live. And it essentially therapy is almost like a magnifying glass. It gets you to highlight the patterns that you've fallen into that aren't helpful to you. We don't consciously choose, today my inner critic's going to be really loud, I'm going to listen to it every minute of the day. It's just something that happens subconsciously, and therapy kind of puts a magnifying glass so you can go, oh yeah, that's not that helpful, or that, process of thinking wasn't very beneficial to me. And then you can either make a choice to think differently, or just observe that that's what your brain's doing. It can do what it likes, but I'm going to carry on with what I want to do anyway.
Right. So if we can transition into maybe like if you have some tips for people like myself who are sometimes dealing with self-doubt, and for me specifically it's in my profession, but for other people it may be in everyday life, if there's like top 3, top 5 tips.
I would say number 1, get rid of comparisons. They are not helpful. We know where they come from in terms of, as we've grown as a society, we needed comparisons to make sure we had mates and make sure that we're part of the fold and that we blend in with whatever tribe we're in. We needed that in the past. We do not need it now. Comparisons, by and large, become unhealthy. Take social media, for example. We compare constantly. Pictures on Instagram, tweets on Twitter. We compare. So work out where the fuel for your comparisons are coming from. Is it putting yourself in certain situations? Is it listening to the inner critic? Is it scrolling on social media? Whatever it is, identify it and then reduce it. I say that like it's really easy. It takes a process, and sometimes journaling or diarying about it can be really helpful. But just having that awareness, building the awareness is really important, first of all, and then starting to reduce whatever behaviour you think, actually, that's not helpful to me. The other thing I would say is take some time to think about what your values are. So when I say to people, what's important in life? They'll go, oh, well, my job and my family. And I'm like, yeah, but what's really important? Have we ever sat and thought about what is deeply important, what really gets your mind going, what really gets your feelings going? Because the reality will be that they're much more nuanced than you think. So it might be, oh, my family are important. Well, actually, it might be that the love that I give and receive from my family is the important bit. That's the thing that we need to live by. Not what our inner critic will then go, okay, family's important, so you're a terrible mom, you're a terrible friend, you're a terrible sister. All of that is just white noise. It is not important. It does not take you towards your values, your goals. It is just interference in the thing that those salesmen on that street again. So salesmen trying to take you off that path that you need to be on. So being clear about your values, and then again raising your awareness of when those salesmen or that white noise is coming up, just being aware of it, not doing anything to it, just observing it from afar. That's what's happening right now in my mind, but I don't need to, jump through the hoops. I don't need to interact with it. It's just there as white noise. We have white noise all the time. There's constantly thoughts going through our heads. We don't pay attention to the vast majority of it. So we can learn to not pay attention to other things too.
Yeah.
So I suppose, is that two?
Yeah, I think that's 2, yeah.
The other thing I would say is SMART goals. Most people have heard of SMART goals. So specific, measurable,
Achievable, realistic,
timed. So if we're thinking, well, my value is professionally, I want to advance. And I'll use my own example. So me going back to uni in January. Professionally, I want to advance because it's very important to me that I provide my clients with what is up to date and what is effective and what is going to work for them and better their lives. It's really, really important to me. So that's my value. So if I think about a SMART goal, well, specific, I want to do the course that's happening in January. Measurable, okay, how will I know when I've done that? Well, I'll complete the course and I'll get the award. Is it achievable? Well, I'll need to think about, can I, take the time to study? Have I got all the equipment that I need? Is it realistic? Can I save up the money it's going to take to, do this course? And is it timely? Well, yeah, it's a year-long course. I've got a year that I can focus on that, and that's something that is doable for me. So now my head, and it's been doing this, I got the place on this course like 6 months ago, and my head has been constantly going, but what if you can't do it? What if it's going to be too much? What if this? What if that? Makes all this noise. If I listened to that, I would never get on this course. But because I've got my SMART goal, I know what my endpoint is going to be. I know what's at the end of that high street beyond those salesmen. I'm going to keep walking towards it, whatever noise comes my way. So it's about being clear about your values, what that means in terms of a goal, and then having an awareness to be able to diffuse, to step away from all the white noise, the chatter that goes on in our heads.
I think you're going to have some salesmen popping up for therapy in the next few weeks now.
I don't mind those sorts of salesmen. They're okay.
All right, cool. So we're going to wrap up with some listener questions. I'm just going to start with one voice message actually we received. So if you're listening to the Bluprint Podcast, you can actually send voice messages through the Anchor app. So we'll put a link in the description. But yeah, I'll just play the first one out loud, and then the rest will be text-based questions.
Hi, I wanted to ask, what practical advice would you give to someone that wanted to stick and maintain to a schedule during the whole pandemic situation, especially with a lot of people working from home? How does one stay focused and maintaining that schedule? Like, what practical advice would you give to that person?
That's question number one. Did you hear that?
Yes, I did. So schedules are essentially what I want people to get rid of. The concept in the head is productivity. Chuck it out of the window. It is not a helpful concept to have in a pandemic. Out of a pandemic, yes, you can have all your, strict deadlines you need to get to and your to-do list and all the rest of it. In terms of pandemic, you need to reassess what is productivity, what is a schedule. It is going to be very, very different. If you're living and working and breathing in the same four walls, you need to have some boundaries. So, like me, at the end of a work day, laptop goes down, books go away, notes go away. I do not look at them outside of work time. The way that I do that is to have a very visual calendar, and I'm one of these geeks that colour codes everything. So my calendar, everything is colour coded, and outside of a certain time in my calendar, I will not do anything work-based, unless it's something very special like this podcast that is allowed. We can have exceptions, we can be flexible, but generally having a schedule that is balanced. So if you think to yourself, well, I'm going to get up at 8 and I'm going to work for 8 hours and then I might have some lunch, that's not doable. It's not achievable. It's not reasonable or something that you can actually persistently achieve. If you think, actually, I can focus for 20 minutes and then I need to go for a wander and make a cup of tea, you do that. So for me, I'm one of these really flitty people that I can focus for about an hour if I'm interacting with someone. So in therapy, it's fine. Podcast, it's fine. But if I'm sat writing notes, my top attention span is probably about 15 minutes. And then I need to go and fiddle with something else or make a cup of tea, wander around. I just sound like I drink tea all day, but you know what I mean? Some sort of change in what we're doing. The other thing is get some outside light if you're able to in terms of COVID. Research has shown that essentially sunlight is so protective for our mood because of what it does in our brain, what it gives us in terms of vitamins. It is essential for us to at least get some fresh air and a bit of sun where safe and possible. It's very easy when you're stuck inside working and living in the same space to have all those boundaries kind of disappear. So it's about writing out yourself a schedule. I'd say always make it visual, whether it's a piece of paper stuck in your fridge, whether it's in a nice diary that you buy yourself, or like me on, Google Calendar, whatever you need to do, but make it visual. Hold yourself accountable for it, but also give a bit of flex. So if you think I'm going to start work at 9 and by 11 I want this one thing done, maybe give yourself an extra half hour and say, well, as long as it's done within that time, this is the thing that I need to get done today. If it's not done, hold yourself accountable. Do I need to do a little bit extra? I'm talking a little bit, not like an all-nighter. Having those boundaries, but with some flexibility, is really important, but also having the breaks. So if you're focusing on a screen, I remember my optician telling me this because I wear glasses for using screens, and he said, look at your screen for 20 minutes, that's fine, but then at least spend 2 minutes looking away from it. So if you think about the amount of eye strain that people are now getting from being on screens so much more, we do really need to break up our days, depending on what work you're doing. Have a bit of a movement break, whether it's, popping out into your garden if you've got one, just wandering around the house, putting some washing on, whatever it might be, but just breaking up your day is really, really important.
Okay, that's question number 1. We got 2 more questions. We actually got like 6 questions. A few people have asked questions, but I'll just pick the ones that I think are quite interesting. Number 2 is how do you deal with text message and phone anxiety? And there's someone else asked how does social media affect self-doubt, but I kind of want to combine them because even me personally, if I get called randomly when I'm busy or when I'm doing something, I just don't pick up. I just get really anxious about it, or when someone says call me back, or I'm just really bad with phone calls, really bad. And then I got a friend who's the same, but with text messages. So he kind of asked that question. So I kind of wanted to combine that, especially with the social media age that we're in. How do you deal with that and kind of get better at that?
I think it's a symptom of the age that we're in. And I think if you think back in the day, so I'm in my 30s, proper ancient. I'm not that ancient, but you know what I mean. So if I think about when I was, say, at primary school, high school, it'd be a case of me saying to someone at school, oh, I'll call on for you later, or I'll ring your house phone. And it was very boundaried. Again, there's a theme here, isn't there? Boundaries. And it'd be a case of, oh, I'll knock on for you after I've had my tea. So they'll know that sometime past 5, I'll knock on and we'll go and play out and whatever else. Now, however, with social media and smartphones, we are constantly on call. We're constantly available. We're constantly accessible. And because everyone is in that system, a lot of people don't respect boundaries. So again, it's about boundarying. That's the first part of it. So for example, in terms of boundary, my phone at 6 o'clock in the evening goes silent completely. I do not answer anything. It does not beep at me. It does not flash up. Nothing happens, because that's my family time. That's the time I'm chilling out. You know, I want to relax. It's me time. The other thing, in terms of the anxiety around texts and social media and things, really the only way to tackle it is to do exposure. So exposure basically means do it, even if it feels anxiety provoking. And that can feel really uncomfortable. And I used to have it doing the podcast, but also doing like videos for business and stuff. I avoided it for months. And then I thought to myself, I'm going to have to do it at some point. And the first few videos, I dreaded it. I hated it. All that white noise in my head was all kicking off. Oh, you're going to sound ridiculous. Da, 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 da. But it's really important that if it's something you want to do, I'm not saying everyone should answer text messages and go on social media and all the rest of it. If it's something you want to do, it's about taking a committed step towards doing the thing you want to do. So if it's someone texts you and you think, actually, the thing I want to do is keep my boundaries, keep your boundaries. Text them when it's convenient for you. If you're someone that thinks, when someone texts me, I want to text back straight away, not something I would advise, then text them back straight away. But I would encourage always boundaries. Our phones, they're brilliant things. They do so much for us, but they can become so toxic, like a ball and chain around our ankles, because we are constantly on call. No profession asks that of us, to be constantly on call every day. So we shouldn't ask it for ourselves personally either.
That definitely makes a lot of sense. I mean, me myself, I'm trying to like tackle that. So I actually thought of making a commitment to making a video about me calling someone different every single day.
Yeah, that's perfect exposure, isn't it? Though, and your anxiety reaction in the beginning will be big. And the thing is, anxiety cannot physically stay around forever. So the more you do it, the more your brain learns that actually that's not a threat, that's okay. And therefore your anxiety will not come up as much.
I've got one more question. I've got two more questions I wanted to ask, but we'll stick with one, and then, or I can ask you both, and you can pick which one you want to answer. All right. So one's, how do we encourage people who don't believe in mental health to actually open up and express their feelings? And then the other one is about, do you think exercise and healthy eating plays a role in bettering your mental state? What other advice would you give for someone who is attempting to escape demotivation in normal activities and low mood that isn't already stated in textbooks or online? So it's kind of like, how do you deal with demotivation and bad moods, low moods, or just feeling low in general kind of thing?
I can probably answer both quickly if that's a preference for us.
That's fine by me.
So in terms of getting people to open up about mental health when they kind of don't believe in it, it depends very much on what their background is. So if we think back to those core beliefs, that sort of inner person, that inner child that's been fostered, over the years, if there's someone that's been taught that emotions are not a thing, emotions are a weakness, they're not something to be talked about, they need therapy. And that is, depending on where they're at in their life, essentially some people have to hit rock bottom to go, actually, I need to do something about this. Some people never reach that place. The thing is, by trying to drag someone to therapy, it never works. It's a bit like you can take a horse to water, you can't make it drink. You cannot drag anyone to therapy. You can normalize it. You can talk about emotions. Try and get away from words that are taboo for that person. So if it's therapy, if it's mental health, talk about talking to someone, or talking about thinking things through. Talk about feelings and emotions rather than kind of therapy jargon, because that can really alienate people. So I think it's a case of, rather than trying to jump in and fix, which comes from a good place but generally isn't helpful for people, it's about normalizing it around them, talking about it, maybe watching programs that touch on that sort of stuff, but just generally making it more in sort of the common arena of chatter, so that it becomes just a normal thing, just part of life. And then hopefully it would open the door to someone that might want to go down that route. In terms of the demotivation, can you remind me about what the eating and physical activity bit was
So
about?
that's kind of like I think she was just talking about how in general a lot of people advise that if you eat healthy and you exercise and that's it, you're going to generally feel better automatically. But what other things can you do to better that?
Yeah. I've heard this before. Oh, you just need to go for a jog every day, or you just need to eat better and you'll feel fine.
Mm.
Those things do take part in mental health. You know, we are beings that have minds and bodies, and research has shown that serotonin, which is like your happy hormone, the thing that boosts your mood, most of it is actually created in your gut, about 95% of it. So without good gut health, it's unlikely you're going to have good mental health. So there is a role to play, but it's kind of a minimalist tunnel vision version of mental health, because if healthy eating and exercise were the only things you'd need, if you think about celebrities, they'd never have any mental health issues. Most of them got personal trainers and chefs on board. They still have anxiety and depression. It's a really common experience. But there's also mental health disorders like psychosis and bipolar, and no amount of healthy eating and exercise is going to fix that. That is a brain condition that, chemically, your brain isn't working quite how it should, and going for a jog every day is just not going to change that. In terms of motivation, it's a tricky one. Start small. So if it's a case of you're waking up at 1 in the afternoon and you think, I can't really be bothered eating, I'll go and watch some TV, you're being your own worst enemy, because that demotivation will just continue to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So it's about taking the small steps. So you might think, right, I'm going to put 5 alarms on at 12 o'clock. I'm going to really make a committed effort to get up, even if I don't want to. And I'm going to get up. Well, I don't feel like having breakfast, so I'll have a cup of tea. I'll have a cereal bar. I'll have something small. Start where it's doable and build yourself up. Have an idea of where you might want to get to, even if you don't believe that you're going to get there. But start small and just make those little steps. It might take you 6 months, might take you a week. Depends on the person. But taking those small steps towards where you want to be will eventually, hopefully, get you there. If it's demotivation to a point where your mood is very low, please, please, please go to counselling or therapy. Look around for someone that is, a decent therapist, has supervision and all the rest of it, because we don't want people to depress for a long time. Depression, if you don't get it treated, it's more likely to come back. It's more likely to be worse when it comes back. So it's really, really important that people do get the help that is out there.
Thanks very much, Jodie. I think we're going to wrap up the podcast now. So if you want to just tell the people where they can find you and where they can find your private clinic as well. So hopefully you get some clients from this.
So on Twitter, I am House Healing CBT. There's no of because it was too long. On Facebook, I'm a House of Healing CBT. There's the website, which is houseofhealingcbt.com, and there's a blog on there as well. And I'm also part of a podcast, which you can find on Anchor, Spotify, Google Podcast, and I think Apple Podcast now as well, which is Converts in Conversation, which is a group of women, all converts to becoming Muslim, and we all just talk about that experience, really.
Cool. So yeah, thank you very much for coming on. It's been a pleasure. You answered a lot of questions that we have. So yeah, I'll just let Ray outro here.
Yeah, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And yeah, that's it.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been good. And I'm glad I didn't listen to all that white noise in my head going, you know nothing. So I'm glad I came on. And yeah, I've really enjoyed it.
Yes, and hopefully I'll start directing movies without doubting myself.
Yeah.
Or you could direct movies even if you doubt yourself. Just do
That's
it
true.
anyway.
That's the goal, right? To do it anyway.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, to any salesman out there, don't doubt yourself. Just keep on selling that stuff.
Yeah, no offense to any salesmen out there.
All right, I'm gonna wrap up the episode.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Bluprint Pod. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you tell a friend and stay tuned for the next one. Peace.